journey through the gospel account of Mark. But we're going to take a little bit of a break to really kick off a new series that we're calling TRAILMIX. TRAILMIX, as we're going to be tackling some biblical truths that, while we know that they're good for us, don't always sound good to us. These biblical truths that while we know they're good for us, don't always maybe sound good to us. That's why we're calling this series TRAILMIX, because let's be real, like nobody goes to a restaurant or goes to the drive-through looking to order a bag of TRAILMIX, right? Like I mean, let's be real. I don't care how many like M&Ms you put in there or chocolate chips. Like it's good, but it's can at times be a little hard to swallow. And so that's kind of where we're going with this series by today, kind of getting into some. Sometimes maybe this hard to swallow biblical principle and truth known as stewardship. Which is at its heart is all about taking care of what's in your hands, but actually belongs to somebody else. but actually belongs to somebody else. I'm telling you, it's a different way. Like when you grab hold of this biblical principle of stewardship, it's a different way of seeing life. It's a different way of seeing your talents, your time, your experiences. By today, looking at a story, really a couple stories and parables that Jesus shares in what is commonly referred to as the parable of the minas. The parable of the minas, and we find it in Luke chapter 19, as this is really towards the end of Jesus' earthly ministry. This is right before he's about to make sort of his triumphal entry into Jerusalem and about to begin this journey to the cross. And this is where we pick up with this. I like how Luke shares this. Verse 11 says, Jesus went on to tell them a parable because he was near Jerusalem and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. He said, a man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return. So he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas. Put this money to work, he said, until I come back. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, we don't want this man to be our king. He was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for the servants to whom he had given the money in order to find out what they had gained with it. The first one came and said, Sir, your mina has earned 10 more. Well done, my good servant, his master replied. Because you've been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities. The second came and said, Sir, your mina has earned 5 more. His master said, you take charge of 5 cities. Then another servant came and said, Sir, here's your mina. I've kept it, laid it away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because I've heard you're a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow. And his master replied, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I'm a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow? Why then didn't you put my money on deposit? So then when I came back, I could have at least collected it with interest. Then he said to those standing by, take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. Sir, they said, he already has 10. He replied, I tell you, to everyone who has, more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. Now, if this story sounds very familiar to some of you, my guess is you're not alone. You're not alone. It's safe to say for those during Jesus' day and age and time, for those who had been walking with him, talking with him for any amount of time, in hearing this story, undoubtedly, they will have been reminded of another story that Jesus tells, and maybe one that you're more than a little familiar with, in the parable of the talents. A story that is almost identical, except as we're going to come to discover, a few really notable differences that we're going to get into a little bit later on. And look, I don't think it's by accident that these stories are seemingly so similar or by coincidence, because truth is, catch this, I don't think one can fully grasp the lesson of the minas without understanding some of the lessons of the talents. Because while the parable of the minas is all about his lordship, the parable of the talents is all about our stewardship. This trusting God, not just with a part of our life, or not just with an area of our life, or not just with a situation in our life, but with all of our lives. In fact, it's been said before, and I think it's so true, is that if Jesus isn't Lord over all, then how do we know he's not Lord at all? As you got to understand that this call to follow him, that this call to pursue him, this call to walk with him, it's not like a drive-through through Burger King. Like where it's all about having it your way, but rather it's a call to instead learn what it is to walk in his ways, knowing that his ways are always going to lead you the best way, the best way for your life. Not just when it comes to how we handle our relationships or how we handle our emotions, but yes, even how we handle our finances, our time, our resources, our stuff. Billy Graham put it this way. He said, tell me what you think about your money, and I will tell you what you think about God. For those two are closely related. Or Martin Luther once put it this way. When describing how someone who is kind of coming to faith, he kind of describes in sort of three conversions that one goes through. The conversion of the mind, what I think about God, the conversion of the heart, what God thinks about us and his love for us. And then the last one he describes as maybe the hardest one of all, the conversion of the purse, what we think about what he has blessed us with. And some of you guys are like, whew, I thought you were going to talk about money, but you're talking about a purse like that. I thought you were going to talk about a wallet, but that doesn't impact me. Anyway, stick with me. Terrible pastor joke. But in saying that, important to note that while money is a talking point in these stories, it is the talking point in these stories. Money was never meant to be the point of these stories, but rather they were meant to ultimately point us to the real treasure found within them. As check this out, in Matthew's account of the parable of the talents that we find in Matthew 25, it says, again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Now, interesting enough, while both stories start off with everyone receiving something, in the parable of talents, what is given initially, though, differs from person to person. Which when you read at first, especially for the guy that just got 1, it might not sound or seem very fair. Like, what's the deal? And listen, we know kind of this tension, this wrestling match when it comes to this ideal fairness. Like, I don't know if you've ever done a group dinner where you sort of, you go out, you eat, dinner at a nice place with a group of friends, and it's all great. It's a great experience. It's a great time till what? Till the check comes. That's right, yeah. Then all of a sudden, it starts to get awkward, all sorts of awkward real quick, doesn't it? Everybody starts looking around, like suddenly you feel this urge to have to go to the bathroom, like right then, right? As I can remember some time ago going out to lunch with several pastor friends of mine, and again, it was all good until the check came. Like, and as the moment the check came, like all of a sudden, like we're just like trying to figure out who ordered what and who ate what, and then again, things start getting really weird really fast, especially with a group of pastors. Is again trying to figure out what's the fairest way to break this down. When somebody came up with this idea, hey, let's just split the check 5 ways. Which, by the way, you know who comes up with that idea? The guy who's like ordered like 6 appetizers ordered from the dinner menu, not the lunch menu, and has like 6 Diet Pepsis on his, that's the guy who makes that suggestion. And I remember just thinking like, oh no, you don't. Like not Mr. 6 drinks guy. Like, no, we're not, that's not splitting it evenly. Like I've been sipping on water the whole time, ordering from the lunch menu. Like, come on now. And again, I bring this up because, look, I share is we don't always know how to handle things. I think sometimes outside of that box of what seems fair or not. But look, getting back to the story of the talents, like I know it might not seem fair, but when you think about it, isn't this life? Isn't this life? Like not everybody starts off at the same place. Not everybody is born with a good father. Not everybody is born into wealth. Not everybody is born with great health. And while it can seem unfair because there was one that got 5 and there was another that got 2 and then there was one that just got 1, can we pause and recognize for a moment that none got none? None got none. Like one got 5, another got 2, another got 1, but none got none. Like everybody got something. In other words, God's saying through this, listen, life is a gift. It's a gift, and the fact that you're even here, the fact that you're even breathing, the fact that some of you are even alive, especially given what you've been through and what God has delivered you out of and through, is a gift. Hey, look, here's why I bring this up is because 1 is only a little. How many know 1 is only little if you're busy staring at the guy who has 5? But when you see your life for what it is, through the lens of his grace, through the lens of his mercy, through the lens of his goodness. James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father. As look, I know our tendency is to complain about what we don't have. But when was the last time you stopped to just give thanks for what you do have? Because again, you could have none. I could have none. Like I could not be here. Like I could not have the breath I do have. I could not have the time I do have. I could not have the job I do have. I could not have the family I do have. Which brings us back to the other parable with this. And the parable of the minas, and it might help to explain why the amount each was given in this story differs from what was given in the parable of the talents. As you got to understand that the value of a single talent was way more than what some of you might think. Did you realize that, back in their day, back in their economy, a single talent was equivalent to, in today's financial terms, several $1 million. It was like winning the lottery. Now contrast that with a mina. A mina would have been seen as pennies compared to that. As a single mina would have been equivalent to like a day's wage. Because, again, the value of these stories, and we kind of touched on this some last week, is not found in what we have, it's found in what we do with what we have. I mean, that's at the heart of stewardship, isn't it? As we find God rewarding them, not because they did more than others, but because they made the most of what they had. Because catch this, listen, you got to understand, listen, God never asks us to be successful. He asks us simply to be faithful. He doesn't ask us to be successful. He simply asks us to be faithful, to make the most of what he's given us. As today, for the time we left this morning, I want to talk about how to make the most of what you've got, whether feel like you've been given a little, whether he's given you a little more, or whether he's given you a lot. Through, again, this principle of stewardship. As look, when you break down these stories, the first thing you notice about the man who got 1 bag is that, interesting enough, he took that 1 bag and he buried it. He hid it so he wouldn't have to see it. Because that's often our tendency, isn't it? Like sort of our primal human instinct, especially when we're scared, like to not want to look at or kind of this tendency to close our eyes whenever something scares us or frightens us or we're confused about something or we don't know how to handle something or whenever we're worried or consumed, like we want to just kind of close our eyes to it, right? Pull the sheets over our head and just hope it goes away. It's kind of like when the plane hits turbulence, we close our eyes. Not that it's going to save us, but we close our eyes. Or what do we do during the scary movie whenever it starts to get a little too tense? Like, oh man, we close our eyes. Or whenever we have to get a shot in our arm. I don't know about you, but even to this day, that shot's coming. I'm not watching. I know there's a few people that like show me the blood. Like I'm good with that. Like that's just weird. But but like me, I'm like still I can't watch. Like just let me know when it's over. Right? Because we have this tendency to kind of think, well, out of sight, out of mind, except how many know that doesn't work so well, especially when it comes to this area of finances in particular. Because as we're going to discover, when your money, how many know when your money's out of sight, out of mind, is when things usually start to get out of hand. As here's my first point, if you're taking notes, is listen, you got to keep your eye on the bag. You got to keep your eye on the bag. And I'm not talking about focusing on getting more money, but learning to focus more on where that money is going. As I would argue, when it comes to what's at the root of so many of our money problems or financial problems, it might not be what you think it is. Because often, what do we tend to think it is? We tend to think it's an earning problem. Well, if I just had more, if I just made more. But listen, if the solution to your problem was making more money, then explain to me why 60% of NBA players, guys who sign on initially to make millions of dollars, are on average bankrupt within 5 years of retiring. Or why 78% of NFL players are bankrupt within 2 years of retiring. It's probably because, listen, they had a budget, but they also had a guy who was in charge of that budget. And they're just like, oh, I don't have to pay, like out of sight, out of mind. One day they look at the budget and they go, where did all my money go? Because again, they out of sight, out of mind. They didn't keep an eye on it. Because how many know there's a big difference between attaining wealth and maintaining wealth? And it's important to understand this because if all you know how to do is to attain it, but you never learn how to maintain it, how many know you'll eventually lose it? As did you know that in America, 70% of wealth that is inherited is lost by the second generation? And catch this, by the third generation, 90% lose their wealth. In fact, there's a famous quote by the Sheikh of Dubai who, when asked about the future of his country, replied, he said this, my grandfather rode a camel, my father rode a camel, I ride a Mercedes, my son rides a Land Rover, and my grandson is going to ride a Land Rover, but my great-grandson is going to have to ride a camel again. Why? Because, again, if all you know how to do is attain it, but if you never learn how to maintain it, you'll eventually lose it. I like how Solomon, speaking of, talk about good financial advice to take from somebody. Solomon, the wealthiest person to ever live, says this, Proverbs 27:23-24. And now again, you got to understand that wealth in biblical times, it was very much an agrarian society, and so it was measured often in terms of herds and flocks. And so he says this, he says, be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds, for riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. Interesting enough, even Jesus touches on this idea and principle, and maybe one of the most famous or well-known stories that he shares in the story, the parable of the lost sheep, where in it he talked about how he had 100 sheep and 99 stayed, but one strayed, one left, right? Only to leave the 99 to go after the one. Now, here's my question. How did he know one was missing? Because let's be real, 99 from a distance, even close up, that looks a lot like 100. See, here's what I'm trying to get at, is that the only way you know one is missing is if each day, which by the way speaks to God's heart and care and concern for you, like there's not a tear you shed that he doesn't see, that he doesn't notice. But listen, the only way you know one is missing is if that shepherd took the time to take stock of the coming and goings of the flock. That as a shepherd, like I know we got 99 here, but where's that one? Now, and again, you might hear that and like, okay, well, that's great back in his day, but like we don't have flocks and herds. Yeah, but we do have income and expenses. Or even in more practical terms, this is what a budget's all about. Where instead of always wondering where your money went, helps you to not have to guess where your money's always wandering off to. As here's the principle in this, you ready? Is that whatever you don't check in on, checks out on you. Again, that's why I say this goes so far beyond how we steward our finances and money. This is like a principle for life. Whatever you don't check in on, ultimately is going to check out on you. That's why it's so important you're taking time to check in on those kids. Check in on that spouse. Check in on that parent. Check in on that house. Check in on that AC unit. Check in on that car. like that, those check engine lights that have been on for like 8 months, like I'm just letting you know, like they don't just go away on their own. Take it from a guy who's just been dealing with this the past couple of weeks, right? Like, they don't just, like you gotta get it checked in on, right? Or else it's gonna check out on you. Because again, whatever you don't take time to check in on, don't take the time to check in on it relationally, emotionally, even financially, don't be surprised when it starts to check out on you. And now you're having to spend more money on a new car because you never took care of the old one. That's a different story for another time. But which brings us something else. If we hope to make the most of what we got through this biblical principle of stewardship is learning to really live below your bag. Another way of saying that could be being okay with living below your means. Whether you make a little, whether you make a little more, or whether you make a lot, the value is in learning to, I guess you could put it this way, learning to act our wage. Proverbs 13:7 puts it this way, says one person pretends to be rich yet has nothing, another person pretends to be poor yet has great wealth. And look, we've all known people who do this, right? Who try to live above their means. It's like when your car is a Mercedes, but your account is Kia. Or your restaurant that you frequent is Georgie's, but you have a McDonald's budget. I got to tell you, McDonald's is getting up there, though. So, yeah, might need to find a better example than that. It's expensive. But again, a lot of times, and we'll hear that. Some of us, we hear that, we go, okay, well, the answer then is why I just need to live within my means, right? Which sounds good. It sounds right. But here's the problem, is if all you ever do is live within your means, it can often feel like there's never any margin in your finances to invest, to save, or to give. Because every time you get an increase in pay, we respond with an increase in lifestyle. So we start to make more money. We start to think, well, I need more house, and I need more stuff, and I need more things, which often comes with more payments. In fact, sociologists actually have a term for this. They call it the Diderot effect. I'm not sure how many of us are familiar with this, but maybe it'll help you to impress friends at a next dinner party you might have. But a little tidbit information background of why the term Diderot effect is that there was once a famous French philosopher, Denis Diderot, who lived nearly his entire life in poverty. But that all changed in 1765. As Diderot was 52 years old and his daughter was about to be married, but he couldn't afford to provide the dowry that was expected. And yet, despite his lack of wealth, Diderot's name and work was incredibly well known to those around him. Because he was, interesting enough, the co-founder and writer of one of the most comprehensive encyclopedias of his time. And so when Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, heard of Diderot's financial trouble, she offered to buy all of his life's work. And so he accepts the deal and sells his life work and makes so much money, like he's got money to spare. And so Diderot, not knowing what to do with his newfound wealth, buys a new scarlet robe. And that's when everything started to go wrong for him. As Diderot's scarlet robe was said to be so beautiful, at least to him, that he immediately noticed how it seemed sort of out of place compared to all of his other humble surroundings. And so the philosopher soon felt the urge to buy some new things, to match the beauty of his robe, to buy a new rug, and buy a new kitchen table, to buy a new mirror, to buy a new armchair. Before long, he was broke again. And again, it's these reactive purchases that have come to be known as the Diderot effect. And this tendency and state where one can find themselves in, where by obtaining a new possession, it sort of creates a spiral of consumption. And look, we've all been there, haven't we? You get the new couch, or in our case, the new used couch. And then all of a sudden it's like, what would go really good with this couch is a bigger TV, right? Like, and a bigger couch, like that's, again, the Diderot effect. As look, what I'm trying to get us to see is, what if behind some of maybe our money problems, some of the stress and anxiety around it is not what we think it is? Maybe it's not so much an earning problem, but rather it's a spending problem. Because listen, what good does it do for you if you make $1 million only to spend $1 million? Either way, you're still broke. Now contrast that with a wealthy mindset, because this might surprise some of you to know, but many of the wealthiest people in our country, they don't live above their means. They don't even live in accordance with their means. They actually tend to live below their means. In fact, interesting enough, I came across a study recently on the kind of cars that millionaires drive. Has any guesses what car brand millionaires tend to drive? Tesla. That may be, yeah, that's definitely up there on the list. But it's probably not what a lot of us would guess. Is the number one brand car that millionaires drive, they found, was Toyota. 16% of millionaires drive a Toyota. That's by far the highest percentage, even higher than Tesla's, amongst the car brands. And before you start thinking like, yeah, wait a second, doesn't Toyota also own Lexus? Listen, the same study also showed that of the 16%, the car models of choice were things like Camrys and Corollas. Because for them, catch this, the goal isn't to get more in life, but to get more from life. To get more from life, which might I add, living below your means really helps enable you to do by creating space, creating margin to invest, creating margin to give, creating margin to really make the most of the time and the talents that God has given you. In fact, I might add to this too, living below your means isn't just beneficial to your financial health, but even your spiritual health as well. As I put on my notes this way, is that actually living below your means is actually training for living above your flesh. Because if you can say no to the product, no to the possession, no to the excessive debt, allows you to say yes to the freedom he calls us to. Not just freedom from some of the stress, money problems in particular can bring, but freedom to step into those opportunities when those opportunities come about. In fact, interesting enough, in the parable of talents, there's this common phrase with the guys who made the most of the money at once. They had, in other words, they had enough margin. They were able to act on the opportunities when they came. Listen, if God calls you to something great today, are you in a place where you're free to say yes? Or is your destiny going to be at the mercy of your debt? Or does it always feel like because you've got this bill, you can't follow his will? 1 Timothy 6 puts it this way. It says, yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let's be content. But people who long to be rich, it's just about money. It's just about stuff for them. Listen, fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction for the love of money. Again, money's not bad. We touched on that last week. But the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. Getting back to our story, this brings us to another point. It's my second to last point, and we'll start to wrap this up. When it comes to the principle of stewardship, is you got to be willing to also work your bag. You got to want to work your bag, or to put it another way, it only works if you work it. In fact, again, look at this story. It says, then the man who had received one bag of gold came, Master, he said, I knew that you're a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. Now here's one of the things I love about God, is how many know that God can look right through what you're saying to see what you're actually saying, what you actually mean. And we see this. That's why he responds the way he does. In verse 26, it says, you wicked, lazy servant, so you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Interesting enough, when the master in the story calls him lazy, catch this, it wasn't because this man didn't know how to work. I mean, he dug a hole. He knew how to work. It was because of how he saw his work. Or maybe better yet said, how he didn't see the value of his work. Seeing it not as a blessing, but as just a burden or a curse. And here's why I bring this up is because listen, I'm, myself included, there's been times in my life where if you really sit there and I listen to, myself talk and listen, when I've heard some of you guys talk about like our jobs or your job or your employer or your boss, you'd think it was anything but a gift. But listen, here's the truth I want you to kind of walk away with. How many know, listen, if you keep cursing it, God can't bless it. And again, it goes beyond money. If you keep cursing that marriage and that spouse, oh, they did this, they did that, they don't do this, they don't do that. Listen, God can't bless what you keep cursing, what you keep tearing down, what you keep minimizing. I like how Ecclesiastes 3:13 puts it, says, I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy and do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all of their, what? Toil, work, right? And it goes on to say, this is a gift from God. Deuteronomy 28:12 says, the Lord will open the heavens, a storehouse of his bounty, to send rain on your land in season and to bless all the work of your hands. You will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. I love that, to bless all the work of your hands. In other words, listen, God doesn't bless bank accounts. He blesses work. Look, I wonder if especially those who feel like their struggle is financial, listen, I wonder how different some of our situations would be if instead of just praying and asking God to help you to win the lottery, and listen, don't get me wrong, I've prayed that prayer myself. But if instead we started to ask the Lord for ideas that actually get you promoted in your job, ideas that maybe help you to start that side hustle or that business. Or rather than complaining about what you lack skill-wise or talent-wise, you just started to make the most of what you do have. Look, I think talent is great, but can I tell you, I think it's also slightly overrated. Like, I love watching talented people do their thing. I love watching talented, people, work their skill. Like, talent is great. It should be nurtured. It should be crafted. It should be molded. But can I tell you, I've also known plenty of people who've accomplished a lot, who've made the most of what God has given them, because rather than complain about what they don't have, they took what they had, and even though they lacked in skill, and even though they might have lacked in talent, they more than made up for with passion. A passion that, mind you, doesn't come from what you do as much as a passion that comes from knowing who you're doing it for. Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving, which brings us to the final thing, is that, again, it's not even about the bag. Again, while money is a talking point of these stories, money was never meant to be the point of them. But it's about pointing to something richer, something more meaningful, something more significant. Because God understands something that we got to get. Listen, when I lack satisfaction in God, that's when I tend to usually start to pursue satisfaction in stuff. Stuff that can't deliver what it so often wants to promise. Case in point, I recently came across some ads. They're called honest ads. Which don't you wish like advertisers would just tell you really what they're after? Here's one of my favorites. Starbucks, we serve you decaf if you're rude. I like that. Like, I've had like 3 of these things. How come it's not doing anything for me? Or how about this one? Subway. Let that bread smell just soak into your clothes, right? Like, you've been to Subway recently? You don't have to raise your hand because we can smell it on you. Like, we know you've been there, right? Or Monopoly. How about this one? A great way to ruin friendships. Get those overly competitive people in your life. Or here's just a few more. Maybelline. Maybe it's Photoshop. And then lastly, Bic. You probably didn't buy it, right? Like, let's be real. Like, when was the last time you ever were in the store looking to buy a package of Bic pens? Because they're everywhere, right? And yet, how many of us, we buy into this myth of more? If I just had a little more, if I was just a little more, only for it to fail to deliver on what it promises. As again, the peace that so many of us are looking for, the joy we're looking for, the fulfillment we're looking for, isn't found in getting more in life, but in realizing there's more than this life. As check out again in Matthew's account, where in sharing this story, the parable of the talents, very similar to the parable of the minas, gives us additional insight into the heart behind it. Saying this, Matthew 25:21, it says, his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Notice he doesn't say, hey, I'm going to put you in charge of 1 million bags of gold or put you in charge of a bigger bank account. That's not what God said. He said, no, I'm going to put you in charge of many things. And then he goes on to add, come and share in your master's happiness. In other words, the reward is not the bag, the reward is the master. And the happiness that we find in the presence of the master, in the presence of our God. Because God knows money doesn't make you happy or healthy. It's not about the bag. Bob Marley, great theologian and also musician, put it this way: some people are so poor that all they have is money. And listen, I think God desires so much more for your life than just that. And in fact, we'll end with this. I was studying up on this, and the more I reflected, it hit me that there's a kind of a common thread throughout the New Testament. When it came to how people responded to Jesus after talking with them, after just being with them, after spending any amount of time with them. And as that often, we see them leaving something behind that was reflective of the very things that once meant everything to them. Because in encountering Jesus, they found something so valuable to them, it made what they had been holding on to previously seem invaluable. Just check out just a few of these examples. Like I think of the woman in John 4 who ends up going to this sort of watering hole. But it's interesting, she goes to this well. It says in the middle of the day. This is a time that she would have expected the least amount of people being there. The hottest hour of the day. And it wasn't because she didn't want to talk with people, but it's because she didn't want people talking about her. Because she had a past. She had some things that were, in her life that culture of that day definitely looked down upon. And when she gets there, she's surprised. She meets this man who, rather than talk down to her or just talk about her, talks and speaks some life and hope into her. And it's in encountering this and running into Jesus at this well, encountering this living water. It's interesting that her first response is to go tell other people. In fact, interesting enough, she's actually the first recorded evangelist of the good news of the gospel message. As she goes and she's like, let me tell you about a man who told me everything I ever did, everything I do. You told me about this living water that's found. And it's interesting, in the text it says that before she leaves, before she goes and shares this message, it says she left her water jar. She left her water jar. She left the thing that she needed to survive, the thing that had been there for in the first place, because the water she had paled in comparison to the living water she found in Jesus. Or I think of Peter and Andrew. Remember the fishermen? They're out there working the family business. Jesus shows up, calls them, hey, come follow me. And what do? They leave their nets, which hopefully was much bigger than this net, but... Again, I figured on a message on stewardship, I'd probably spending a fortune on the net and, go with the budget option. But anyway, they left it all behind to follow him because they realized in him, listen, they were being invited to so much more than just the way they'd always just, survived and just gotten by and just doing things the way they'd always done them. But God was inviting them to a life of fulfillment, a life of purpose, a life of significance. Or I think of blind Bartimaeus. We've been going through the book of Mark, and Mark 10, at the very end of it, there's a story of Jesus healing blind Bartimaeus, who, again, he's got this cloak, and Jesus comes, and he's begging for mercy, he's begging it for help, and Jesus does the miraculous, heals him. And it's interesting because blind Bartimaeus' first response is he gets up and he leaves his cloak behind. And that's significant because a cloak back then, especially if you were, had a disability, oftentimes you couldn't work a job back in that culture, back in that society. And so they would use their cloak as a place where they would collect alms, they would collect money, they'd collect donations. So literally when he's standing up, when he's taking his cloak and leaving it behind, he's tossing the money, everything that was of significance, everything that was valued, because it paled in comparison to encountering Jesus and his grace and his mercy for him. Or I think of the woman who right at the end of Jesus' ministry, she shows up with a bottle of perfume, much more expensive than this bottle of perfume. In fact, the bottle of perfume would have been equivalent to a year's worth of wages. And she pours it over Jesus to worship him, because in his face and in seeing Jesus, she saw something so much more valuable than all of her life's work. Or I think this last one in Revelation 4:10 through 7, and this is going to hold true for all of us at the end of our lives. The 24 elders fall down before him. It is referencing Jesus here, sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you create all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." You know what these crowns in heaven represent? It's this moment we will receive our eternal reward. Like all those times that you went out of your way to pray for somebody, all those times that you invited somebody to church, and all those times that you gave of yourself. This eternal reward of as a result of what we did with everything that God has given us. Sort of the GDP of our lives, if you will. And I believe this. I believe he's going to give it to us. And as awesome as that is, when we're receiving that eternal reward, I believe this. I believe in light of his majesty, in light of his glory, in light of his presence, I believe we're all going to be so blown away by the beauty of Jesus that everything we've worked on earth to try to achieve or get, we're not going to look at it or see it as treasure anymore. But we're going to see it as just one more thing I get to lay at the feet of Jesus. Because in comparison to the beauty and the wonder and the awe of God, because you know that like the presence of Jesus, that's what makes heaven heaven, right? Because in him is the fullness of joy. In him is the fullness of peace. In him is the fullness of everything that we're pursuing, everything that we've been chasing after. It's all found in him. In fact, I left it, the reason I didn't share the title of this message is because, I saved it for the end because I think it encapsulates, getting back to that parable of the Minas, what it's really all about. And it's really all about this Minas touch, because the promise in the life of the believer is not that after you meet Jesus, everything you touch turns to gold. It's that after you've been touched by Jesus, you find a treasure of greater worth than gold or money or status could ever provide. Which, when you think about it, doesn't it put your whole life in greater perspective? Everything that we do on this earth, it's not about the bag, it's about living our life in a way that when we get to the end of all, we have something to lay down at his feet when we encounter him. That everything I'm doing on this earth, I'm storing up in heaven, not because heaven has something that I want to buy. It's not like there's a duty-free store in heaven that I won't have money for and I got to collect this wealth. But because I want to have something to lay at the feet of Jesus. Because it's in him we find our reward. It's in him we find our worth. It's in him we find our value. It's in him we find a treasure that money and stuff could never buy. It's like I want to leave you with this verse. I like Paul's words, how he puts it, Philippians 3. I once thought these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. For his sake, I've discarded everything else, counting it all as garbage so I could gain Christ and become one with him. I no longer count on my own righteousness through obeying the law. Rather, I become righteous through faith in Christ. For God's way of making us right with himself depends on faith. It's all about looking to him, trusting in him, leaning on him. Because that's where we find true wealth, true treasure, true value. Look, I want to pray for you today. And again, that's my prayer. In fact, right where you're at, I just want to encourage you is, if maybe you got the willingness, just sort of open up your hands as just sort of a symbol of, God, I'm giving it all over to you. Like the things that I've been stressing about and I've been worrying about, it pales in comparison to what I have in you. All the worry of what I don't have, what I didn't get, it compels in comparison to what I do have with you, Jesus. Because if I got you, I've got everything. I've got everything I need to live life to the full, to live life full of peace, life full of joy, life full of purpose, life full of value, to make the most out of every minute, every second of this, not just on when I get to heaven, but even on this side of eternity as well. And so, God, we just lay it at your feet. We lay our time, we lay our talents, we even lay our worries and our stresses. We lay it at your feet. Because when we look at what we have with you, Jesus, how can we have any other response? As God, we give it all over to you right now. We give the job, we give the finances, we give the relationship, we give the ministry, we give it all over to you. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. Well,